At 71 degrees C, the human body is constantly under attack, and survival is never a matter of physical strength or courage alone. Every movement, every decision, and every habit becomes critical. Samuel learned early on that the cold does not negotiate. It does not forgive mistakes, and it does not reward recklessness. Bravery, in the sense of charging into danger without thought, is useless in this environment. What keeps a person alive is discipline, the kind that turns survival into a structured, unbreakable routine. Each morning began with precise preparation. Clothing was layered carefully, every zipper, strap and glove in its exact position. One forgotten layer, one moment of carelessness, could result in frostbite within minutes. Movement outside was never hurried. Rushing generates heat temporarily, but it also leads to errors, dropping essential equipment, leaving a gap in protection, or losing coordination. Samuel's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, designed to conserve energy while maintaining safety. Even breathing required attention. In such frigid temperatures, inhaling too quickly or without proper covering can freeze lung tissue and shock the system. Samuel had trained himself to control each breath, slow and steady, in rhythm with his own body. Food and hydration were also approached with discipline. Unlike the casual way most people eat, he had to plan meals according to the hours of daylight, the availability of preserved food, and the efficiency of digestion in cold temperatures. Eating too quickly or too little could sap energy reserves and slow reaction times. Maintaining fire was another area where discipline dictated survival. Samuel treated fuel like gold, carefully rationing it, stacking it in precise order, and monitoring the fire constantly. If it went out, the consequences could be immediate and fatal. Every action was performed with the understanding that mistakes in this environment could not be undone. There was no margin for error, no second chances. This level of discipline extended to sleep as well. The human body naturally slows in cold to conserve energy, but that can be deadly. Samuel trained himself to wake multiple times during the night, to stoke the fire and check his surroundings, ensuring that even unconscious rest did not become a threat. Over the years, this discipline became instinctive. What once required conscious effort became second nature. His body and mind moved in harmony with the harsh environment, reacting correctly without hesitation. Discipline, in the extreme cold, is not about restriction, it is about survival. It turns fear into structure, chaos into predictability, and danger into manageable steps. Samuel survived not because he was stronger or braver than anyone else, but because he understood that in the coldest place on earth, the rules are simple and unyielding. Follow them without question and you live. Ignore them and you perish. Every day of his 20-year isolation proved that survival is earned through meticulous, unwavering discipline, and that even the most extreme environment respects order more than courage. In an environment where temperatures plunge to 71 degrees C, routine becomes more than habit. It becomes survival itself. Samuel's life revolved entirely around repetition, structure, and precision. Every action he took, from the moment he woke up to the moment he went to sleep, was dictated by the necessity to preserve his body and maintain his environment. His mornings began with meticulous preparation. Layering clothing wasn't just about warmth. It was about ensuring that no part of his body was exposed to the merciless cold, that every zipper, every button, every strap was perfectly positioned. The smallest lapse, a glove slightly loose, a scarf not covering the neck entirely, could lead to frostbite before he even realized it. Once fully dressed, he moved methodically to check his supplies, inspect the condition of his shelter, and ensure that the fire was stable and ready for the day ahead. Each step followed a precise order. Nothing was left to chance, because in such extremes, chaos leads to death. Food and water were rationed and consumed according to strict schedules. Unlike life elsewhere, where meals might be skipped or delayed without consequence, in this cold, mismanaging nutrition or hydration could quickly sap strength and slow mental reflexes. increasing the risk of accidents. Samuel's fire, the very heart of his existence, was tended to multiple times a day. Fuel had to be arranged meticulously, monitored constantly, and preserved for maximum efficiency. Even one night when the fire went out could mean the end, so tending it wasn't a chore, it was a ritual, performed with unwavering attention. Sleep itself was regulated with the same precision. In such cold, the body's natural instinct to conserve energy can become dangerous, slowing the heart and breathing to perilous levels. Samuel trained himself to wake periodically, to stoke the fire, stretch, and ensure that his body remained active enough to survive the night. Over the years, these routines became instinctive. What started as conscious, deliberate actions transformed into an almost automatic series of movements. Discipline and repetition created a protective rhythm, an internal clock that synchronized with the demands of the harsh environment. Loneliness could have made the repetition unbearable, but Samuel found a strange sense of comfort in the routine. Each repeated task became a signal that he was still alive, still capable, still in control. In the face of extreme cold, routine transforms from mundane to sacred. It imposes order on chaos, creates predictability in a world designed to kill, and gives the human mind a framework to operate within, even when every other element of life is uncertain. Samuel's 20 years of survival were not the result of chance or heroism. They were the product of unwavering routine, a structured life in which every day was carefully managed and every moment directed toward the preservation of life. In this way, repetition and discipline became his armor, his companion, and ultimately the difference between life and death. Fire was more than warmth for Samuel. It was the heartbeat of his survival, the single factor that separated life from death in the frozen expanse around him. In a place where temperatures plummeted to 71 degrees C, fire was not a luxury, a source of comfort, or even merely a tool. It was an essential lifeline. Without it, water froze instantly, food became inedible, and the human body could not maintain the minimal core temperature necessary to sustain life. Samuel understood this better than anything else, and so he treated every flame as sacred. Each morning, the first act of his day was to tend to the fire. Even if embers glowed faintly from the night, he carefully stoked them, adding fuel in precise amounts, ensuring that the fire would not flare up too violently or die down too quickly. It was a delicate balance. Too much haste could scatter the sparks and waste precious fuel, while neglect could allow the temperature of his shelter to plummet, leaving him vulnerable to the brutal cold. Fuel itself was a resource that required planning and foresight. Samuel rationed it carefully, collecting wood or other materials during brief excursions outside, stacking them methodically, and storing them in a way that protected them from frost and moisture. Each piece of fuel had a purpose, and wasting even a single branch could mean risking his safety later in the day or night. Nights were the most dangerous, because while the cold outside was obvious, the creeping chill within his shelter could be fatal if the fire faltered. Samuel trained himself to wake multiple times during the night to ensure the fire remained alive, feeding it, adjusting it, and measuring the warmth in every corner of his shelter. In these moments, fire was not just warmth. It was awareness, alertness, and a constant reminder that survival required vigilance. Beyond keeping him alive, fire dictated his daily rhythm. Meals had to be prepared with the fire in mind. Water had to be melted from ice before it could be consumed. Even the smallest tasks, shaving frozen food into edible portions or thawing meat, depended on the heat it provided. Without fire, nothing functioned, and Samuel understood that the slightest lapse could have irreversible consequences. Over the years, tending the fire became an instinctive act, almost a meditative practice. It was his anchor, providing both a literal and psychological center in the vast, empty, frozen wilderness. While everything else in his environment was uncontrollable, the fire was something he could command, maintain, and protect. It demanded discipline, respect, and consistency, and in return, it gave him life. Samuel's survival at its core was a testament to the power of understanding and respecting the essentials. He did not rely on luck, he did not wait for help, and he did not underestimate the cold. Fire was the axis around which his life turned, and every spark he nurtured carried with it the difference between living another day and succumbing to the icy silence that surrounded him. It was not just heat, it was survival made tangible. Loneliness in the frozen expanse where Samuel lived was more than an emotional challenge. It was a constant, invisible threat to his survival. For 20 years, he faced not just the lethal temperatures of 71 degrees C, but the endless silence of a world devoid of human presence. No voices, no footsteps, no laughter, no reassurance, only the wind, the snow, and the echo of his own thoughts. At first, the solitude was almost peaceful. It allowed him to focus entirely on survival, on the precise routines and disciplines that kept him alive. The cold was tangible, measurable, and conquerable in its own way, but loneliness was intangible, insidious, and often far more exhausting. Weeks would pass without hearing another human sound, months without seeing a face, and years without sharing even the smallest conversation. The mind, deprived of social interaction, begins to replay memories, conversations, and regrets with relentless intensity. Samuel found that his own thoughts could be both companion and adversary. In the beginning, he struggled with this. He would talk aloud simply to hear another voice, even if it was his own. He created small rituals to maintain a sense of connection to the world that existed beyond the ice. Speaking to objects, reciting stories, or repeating past lessons. These acts were not mere quirks, they were survival strategies, techniques to prevent his mind from slipping into despair. Over time, Samuel developed a strange relationship with silence itself. What once felt oppressive became familiar, predictable, and almost comforting. The emptiness of the landscape mirrored his internal world, allowing him to observe his own thoughts with clarity, to recognize patterns, and to regulate his emotions. Yet, loneliness also sharpened his perception. Every sound, the snap of ice, the rustle of snow, the distant howl of wind, was amplified, alerting him to dangers that someone surrounded by the noise of society might never notice. His mental endurance became as crucial as his physical endurance. Nights were especially challenging. Darkness magnified isolation, and the quiet could become deafening. Samuel trained himself to wake at intervals, not just to check the fire or his supplies, but to engage his mind, to speak aloud, to prevent the creeping paralysis of isolation. The psychological discipline required to face such sustained solitude is difficult to imagine. Most people experience loneliness in bursts. Samuel lived with it as a constant companion. It tested his resilience, forced him to confront the limits of his patience, and demanded creativity in maintaining his mental stability. Yet, in a way, the isolation also allowed him to understand himself more fully. There were no distractions, no external pressures, no societal expectations, only the essential tasks of survival and the raw confrontation with one's own thoughts. In this extreme environment, emotional survival was inseparable from physical survival. Loneliness was not simply endured, it was managed, respected, and integrated into daily life. Samuel's story shows that in extreme isolation, the human mind is pushed to its limits, revealing both fragility and extraordinary capacity for adaptation. To survive alone in one of the coldest places on Earth, he had to master not only the environment but also himself. Samuel's survival in the coldest place on Earth was not a story of conquest over nature, but a story of respect and adaptation. The environment around him was merciless, offering no forgiveness for mistakes and no second chances, and it became clear that resisting it would only hasten failure. He did not attempt to dominate the ice, the wind, or the extreme temperatures. Instead, he observed, listened, and learned. Each gust of wind, each drop in temperature, each crack of ice carried information, and Samuel treated these signs with utmost seriousness. By paying attention, he could anticipate danger, adjust his clothing, move efficiently, or tend to his fire in advance. Nature, in this sense, was not an adversary to be defeated, but a force to be understood and respected. This mindset shaped every decision he made. Even the simplest tasks, walking to collect fuel, preparing meals, or maintaining his shelter, were approached with an awareness of the natural limits around him. He did not underestimate the cold because he had witnessed firsthand how quickly it could claim the unprepared, and he did not overestimate his own endurance because the environment demanded humility. The lessons of respect extended to his body as well. Samuel became intimately aware of how his core temperature fluctuated, which parts of his body were most vulnerable, and how fatigue or hunger could increase risk. He adjusted his actions accordingly, never forcing his body to overexert itself, and never ignoring signs of danger. Over time, this constant awareness allowed him to survive where others would not. Adaptation was not only physical but mental. The isolation, extreme conditions, and relentless challenges required a mindset that acknowledged limitations while seeking solutions. Samuel did not rely on luck, nor did he expect miracles. He relied on observation, knowledge, and consistent effort. This approach allowed him to remain calm in situations that would terrify most people. Storms, equipment failures, and freezing nights were not approached with panic but with methodical assessment and careful action. The cold punished recklessness but rewarded attentiveness, and Samuel learned to align his behavior with that principle. His respect for nature also manifested in the way he managed resources. Firewood, food, and water were never wasted because he understood that each element had to be preserved to sustain life in a harsh, unforgiving environment. Even minor carelessness could have catastrophic consequences, and this awareness instilled a discipline that became second nature. By the end of his 20-year isolation, Samuel's story was clear. Survival in extreme conditions is not about overpowering the environment, but about harmonizing with it. The cold, the wind, and the ice dictated the rules, and those rules were absolute. Success came to those who listened and adapted. Failure came to those who acted without awareness. Samuel's life illustrates that in the harshest places on earth, respect for nature is not philosophical, it is practical, immediate, and essential. The environment does not negotiate, but it does reward those who understand and honor its power. And through that understanding he endured what most would consider impossible.